I also invite on stage Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, reformer, master strategist, and the man whose budget in a few weeks' time may relaunch the India story. May I now request, Mr. Jaitley will take a few questions, but before that, may I request him to make his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Ganguly. Mr. Vineet Jain, ladies and gentlemen, I think one of the consequences of this changed environment in India is that people have been enthused at least to have a very large number of global conferences. And it's virtually become a occupational hazard for us, since you have to go to each one of them and then endeavor to say something different from what you said in the previous one. This is something I recently wrote about. Last week, I had an opportunity to attend two such summits, one in Kolkata and one at Gandhinagar. And I'm told yesterday the one in Jaipur had started, which I could not attend. But I was very enthused to find that even though the size of the two was entirely different, the kind of appeal being made to investors, the arguments being given in order to invite them, at both places were almost identical. I was very encouraged when in Kolkata I was being introduced to investors who are setting up educational institutions, healthcare centers, hospitals, even hotels. And I had commented, if state after state start going on this track, probably what would result in the whole process is that India would succeed, irrespective of which political party you belong to, in having a shared national vision, at least on a few elementary things. So irrespective of which side you sit in parliament or in the state legislature, there are a few things. National security is one issue, growth, development, national economy is another issue, where perhaps despite some differences, the major political parties could at least have some shared vision in the larger interest of the country. For the last 7 to 8 months, we've had an opportunity after the change that took place in Delhi. And one of the obvious things were the people were getting restless. People want quick decisions, they want the correct decisions, and they don't want to be told that the political system in the country is a problematic one, and therefore decisions are not possible. The concluding minutes of the last session I just heard, and what one of the participants said, that we want ease of doing business, quick decisions. And in fact, the biggest criticism of our government today is, why are you in a hurry? Why did you not wait for the next session, and if the next session was disturbed, still the next session? Editorial writers have a great facility. If we had followed that course, what happens to the promises you made? You have just been tripped by somebody who disturbs the session. And if we bypass that route, the comment that an editorial writer can legitimately make is, are you having too many ordinances? But we are fairly certain, and we are committed to this cause, that India does need effective decisions and effective and clear implementation roadmap. In order to arrive at this conclusion, we also have realized what went wrong in the last 4 or 5 years. And therefore, at the end of the day, excuses on why I could not deliver will never be an alibi. Anilji just now mentioned the case of the company he's concerned with. We are equally concerned with it. And a part of our responsibility also is to clear up the mess left behind. So we have to reassure investors, which we are endeavoring to do, that we'll have a non-adversarial tax regime. This government has no intention of using the retrospective taxation powers, even though it's a sovereign power belonging to the legislature. I have repeatedly been saying almost ad nauseum that unfair and aggressive taxes momentarily will give me a false belief that my taxation kitty is going to be very large. But none of the controversial cases, now that I'm in the process of discussing the current year's accounts and the next year's budget, not one of these controversial cases, based on this ultra-aggressive approach of the revenue, has brought me single rupee of revenue. It's only brought the Indian economy a bad name. We are a society governed by the rule of law, and ultimately some tribunal, some court somewhere will restrain the state or the exchequer if the basis of that levy itself is not fair. We've tried to open as many doors as possible for investment to come in. And I think those traditional horizons of debate in India are changing. That decisions can be tripped through protest, I think is no longer a very valid option. A large part of India today constitutes that middle class. There's a class below that which is the aspirational class, which is also looking for the same facilities, has the same aspirations, and is therefore wanting to give that India a chance which becomes a bigger land of opportunities. We are concerned with the easy decision-making process which eases the doing of business in India. I'd hate to see during the tenure of our government a situation where somebody takes a license for a telephone operation and ultimately finds that his entire investment has been confiscated because there was some corruption in the allocation system. So whether it's spectrum, whether it is coal, whether it is other mineral, we are laying down the benchmark that there will be no discretions involved. There will be a market mechanism to find out what the best price is. So this old concept in allocation of mineral that first come, first serve. So the best printer gets the mineral resource. He reaches the office first on the day of opening of the mining requirement. Now this obsolete concepts, we have just done away with them. The coal allocation, ultimately a criticism is being made, and it's a strange criticism to be made in the year 2015. Why should you bring in the private sector into coal? Besides this argument becoming too obsolete, what was happening between 2006 and 2014? Wasn't it the private sector which was being allocated the mines by a discretionary process? What we are doing is not substantially different. The only difference is, instead of picking it up by discretion, an exercise of power which was prima facie colorable. We've left it to the market mechanism to decide what the price should be. And in order to keep the consumer interest in mind, it's a reverse auction. So that if you have a lesser, if the prices go high, then power will be costlier. So it's a reverse auction. He who gets it the cheapest then has to supply power at a cheaper cost, so the consumer gets the benefit. And the fixed amount each successful bidder deposits goes to the coal-bearing states. So it's Jharkhand, it's West Bengal, it's Orissa, it's Chhattisgarh. All 4 states which need larger revenue, which over the next 1 decade are going to get a huge amount of revenue only because they had the mines. Otherwise, they were only entitled to some element of royalty and nothing else. We are looking at subsidy rationalization from the 1st of January after fuel, petrol which was done by the previous government, diesel which has been linked to the market by us. Now the LPG subsidy is going directly into the accounts. Hopefully at some stage we'll see India where we also are able to carve out a category who's not entitled to that subsidy. We've already started making the right noises in that direction. GST, I'm fairly certain that there is now broadly a consensus between the states. We made sure in the initial stages that we cushion the states, no state loses revenue. The idea behind the Niti Aayog really is that the old concept of one scheme, you had 130 schemes, then it became 67 schemes. And each scheme will apply to each centrally sponsored scheme to each state. So Punjab's requirement and Tripura's requirements are the same. That was the basis of these centrally sponsored schemes. So hopefully in the months to come, you'll see a much larger revenue in terms of percentage from the divisible pool also going to the states. It will lead to a greater empowerment of the states. And I think what's extremely important, and I've said this on more than one occasion now, we are going to see India which is more federal. So the regional aspirations are going to be met. We've spoken of cooperative federalism, but I am now going to see India which also sees what I've been terming as competitive federalism. So if somebody in the Congress party has a problem with the land ordinance, where we've corrected the 2013 Act, their party governments are fully welcome to implement the old law. We will certainly permit them. Let me see one of their chief ministers stand up and say that I'll follow what my central leadership is saying. And if they did that, then in a world of competitive federalism, the investor, like the consumer, is also the king. He has a choice between which country to invest in. He also has a choice which state to invest in. And therefore, states which are going to facilitate him more easily, the investor is going to pick and choose those states. And I'm quite certain the next few months will hopefully see a lot more endeavor by the government in the direction of making our manufacturing more competitive. Investment also including public investment in infrastructure, and further steps that we are able to generate a lot of domestic investment and invite as much as we can within the framework of our policy internationally. There's a great opportunity for us. The opportunity being that a lot of competitive economies globally, US is a far bigger economy, so I can't ever term them as competitive to us. Except them, there are many competitive economies which are relatively slowing down. And if we are able to improve upon our growth rates, our revenues, in the next 1 or 2 years, which I am quite certain they would, I hope this year will be better than the last year. And the next year and two will certainly be much better. And therefore, we have a great opportunity in this competitive environment, even qua other competitive economies, to offer the investors a legitimate choice as far as India is concerned. Thank you. That's all I had to say.
Thank you. Thank you. You've certainly given us a headline with the challenge to the Congress chief ministers to implement the old Land Acquisition Act. So let's see what the response to that is. And you've given us a headline with that. Since we are greedy for headlines, and this is the first time you're speaking after the rate cut by the RBI, and on the promise that we'll report exactly, your first time you're speaking public after RBI's rate cut. So could we have your reaction to the rate cut?
You see, I've always believed that the RBI is a mature institution. And speaking for myself, we would like to see the RBI's professionalism as an institution to grow. So we will strengthen that institution. There can be various opinions as to when the cuts are required and when they are not required. We've had a debate on this. But I'm glad, I think it's an important turning point after 2 years that Indian rates are going to move downwards. And therefore, the market reactions also have been much better. I think this will leave somewhat more money in the hands of consumers. So hopefully increase spending, make loans cheaper, and areas like consumer items where even in the last 2-3 months, the growth has been relatively slower. So they'll initiate some faster growth on those areas, hopefully add to growth, add to investment.
Thank you. Mr. Jaitley has agreed to take a few questions. So could I ask Sunil to ask a question of the FM? Could we get a mic to him, please?
Finance Minister, it's always a pleasure to hear your views, and clearly you always inspire and enthuse the business community. Last decade or so, most part of the last decade has been in some sense a lost opportunity, being hobbled with the coalition politics. You are blessed with a very strong mandate, and as you rightly said, you're moving at a very fast clip. The worry sometimes we have is, despite a very decisive movement forward through ordinances, there may be need for a persuasive politics around the opposition as well. Because eventually opposition need to also participate in right decision making. While debate is the right, but I think they need to move the agenda of the nation forward as well. And if you recall, during the previous government, I had written a letter which was published in the ET on the front page itself, urging the opposition to cooperate. So while you must move forward, there's an opportunity for a joint session. I would say persuasive politics around some of the opposition, some of the semi-allies that you have may also be necessary. Can the industry take heart that one of the two options, either by way of a very strong, decisive move forward through ordinances or persuasive politics, Indian and global industry can be comforted that the reform agenda that you are moving forward will not get hampered?
You see, I think you'll have to keep all your options open. And the reason why you'll have to keep all your options open is that we'll try the persuasion route because that's the best route. I am not so sure how much the persuasion route will succeed. Each one of these important legislations, many of them, before the government took any steps, some of them I've personally handed it over at least to the principal opposition party, that this is what we have on the agenda. So it's not that we just sprung a surprise out of the blue. And therefore, would your party like to consider it? So far, bad luck is that I have also not been able to persuade them to support legislations which they had introduced in Parliament. Therefore, I am not very sure whether the persuasion route will succeed. Some of the bills, I have no doubt, should ordinarily be passed in both houses of Parliament. The insurance is a law which should be passed in both houses of Parliament. After all that the mining law says is that instead of first come, first serve, let's have an auction, an e-bidding. All that the coal law says is we'll exactly do what you were doing, except we won't do it by a discretion, we'll do it by a bidding. That's substantially the law. So we should be able to persuade them. If the persuasion doesn't work, then of course there is a constitutional mechanism. And I think that will be set into motion. And if they still obstruct, I think every year we have a couple of state assembly elections. And therefore, what businesses call the creeping acquisition of the upper house is on. And these kind of tactics may not last very long.
Okay, great. Could I ask Sunil Munjal to ask a question? Please get the mic to Mr. Munjal.
Mr. Jaitley, one of the concerns we've all had for a while now is growth, and you've verbalized this on more than one occasion. We were hoping for a consumption-led recovery to start. That's been patchy and slow. The option we have now is an investment-led recovery in addition to consumption. Since inflation has been low, global commodity and oil prices are trending down, would you consider a higher spend from your budget now, especially on infrastructure or projects which have a higher multiplier, especially if it allows the fiscal deficit to ride higher than your target of 4.1. If it goes up to 4.3 to 4.4, it gives you another 150,000 crores ability to spend. Is that a possibility right now for India?
No, I think those numbers may not be very accurate, but now that the exercise of budget preparation is on, I'll certainly keep your advice in mind. You see, on a lighter note, it gets suggested to me a couple of times every day that you must come with big bang, bold ideas. So whoever gives this suggestion, I ask them for that idea. And they're all promising to get back to me. So I'll certainly keep your idea in mind.
Would Mr. Narayan Murthy like to ask a question? Could you get a mic to Mr. Murthy?
It's somewhat funny that I have been almost at every forum that Arun and I have shared. I've been asked to ask him questions. But anyway, there is a perception that a lot of entrepreneurs are very uncomfortable about starting their businesses in India, and they are going off to Singapore and other countries. I'm sure you would have met several of them as part of your budget consultations. What are the steps that you would do to stem that flight of entrepreneurial ideas from India?
Mr. Narayan Murthy, we couldn't, if you give the mic.
No, I just asked. Many entrepreneurs have been telling me that India is not the country where entrepreneurial activities are encouraged because of various laws. And therefore, there seems to be a flight of entrepreneurial ideas to Singapore and other countries? And what are the specific steps that you will take so that you retain high quality entrepreneurs in India, including the venture capitalists?
Yeah, just to supplement the question, I think many of the new age companies like Flipkart are actually choose to register themselves in Singapore, although they are in substance an Indian company. They are, their corporate form is that of a Singaporean company. This is an increasing trend. So how do you plan to reverse?
I think one of the reasons I've been able to analyze is a tax reason. And last year, concerned with this, we did announce some steps in the finance bill, as also in the budget. And we thought that a lot of companies, Indian companies who are stationing their executives and professionals in Singapore, essentially because of a more favorable tax climate there, should shift base to India. It hasn't happened in a big way. Day before yesterday, or was it yesterday, the whole group of them, almost about 20 of them, collectively came and met me. And one of the facts that they mentioned was that we haven't done enough to persuade them to shift back to India. And therefore, they've given detailed differences, particularly taxation related, which their companies and their businesses enjoy, particularly if they are in Singapore rather than being in India. The issue is under a serious examination.
Could I ask, to the gentleman there? You may have to, if you have a loud voice, you can try, otherwise get the mic too. Yep.
Honorable Finance Minister, before the government came to power, there was talk that you'd all had meetings and about removing income tax and bringing in a transaction tax. But now that you're in power, is any such thought still there? Something really radical, which you seem to have considered before the election?
Can I just pause that? I think we are just waiting for the Prime Minister to arrive. Mr. Jaitley will answer the question, but we'll just pause it for just a minute.
You're absolutely right. There was a group based out of Pune, and I found them as very, very well-meaning people who had conceived this idea. They called themselves Arth Kranti, so revolution in taxation structure, and they'd developed a model on that basis. Now they'd come and met us, and some of our other well-wishers like Baba Ramdev were strongly supporting that viewpoint. They made a detailed presentation, we considered it. And then on behalf of my party, I had, prior to the election, a series of interaction with them, and once the Institute of Chartered Accountants organized a discussion where I went along with them. And even at that time, I pointed out the difficulties that would arise in that process. Now, before you could implement it, India has to shift entirely to plastic currency. You have to become a cashless society. And therefore, it didn't seem very practicable if you, without being, you went into ideas of those kind of taxes. These days, amongst the very well-meaning suggestions which are being given to us, you can't make it mandatory, but how do you take steps which make you a more a credit card economy? And now it's going to be more easily possible. Now it's at least plausible, because India has about 24 crore families. Only 14 crore of them had a bank account. Now, as a part of the financial inclusion scheme, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, the first phase of which gets over on the 26th of January this month, we had targeted 10 crore more accounts. And there may be duplications within the families, and we calculated that 7.5 crore families will get accounts. So we'll move up to at least 21 odd crores out of the 24 crore families in India. We've already touched the 11 crore figure, and we still have a few weeks to the Republic Day. Now, if we are able to have these Janadhan accounts in addition to the earlier accounts, and each Janadhan account holder is now getting a rupee card. The subsidies of the weaker sections are now, we've started from the 1st of January going into those accounts. Each one also gets the benefit of a accident policy and a life policy. This is something that the government is subsidizing in order to incentivize them. One of the suggestions which has been made to us is, can you use a marginal tax incentive in order to incentivize people on these debit cards at least? Therefore, even though you don't become a cashless society entirely, can you take steps in that direction? Now, I don't know how far it's possible, but I think it's a suggestion worth serious examination.